So for this week, we're going to start writing our rhetorical listening essay, and we're going to take it in parts. We're not going to write the whole essay this week. We're just going to write the first part of it. So we're going to focus on writing the introduction and the first discussion section. So now, if you recall from the organizing your rhetorical listening essay that I talked about earlier in this lesson, you want to think about an introduction, two significant moments or two specific points that you want to make, and then a conclusion. So for this paper, we're going to focus for this week on writing our introduction and our first discussion section, or the section on our first point or significant moment. So let's look at this example. So for this lesson, you're going to submit the first round of your rhetorical listening essay, your paper's introduction, and the first discussion section. Now, you might be more familiar with hearing maybe body paragraphs, and that's okay too. I call them discussion sections because oftentimes you might have more than one paragraph. And so we're trying to kind of get out of that framework of thinking about our introduction as one paragraph and our body paragraphs as one paragraph, one paragraph, one paragraph conclusion. And instead think about them more holistically. Introduction, first major point, second major point, conclusion. Now within those sections, you might have more than one paragraph. So you'll have an introduction with a lead-in, a background article reference, and a thesis statement. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Then you'll have a discussion section, or that first main point, either that first significant moment or that first important point that you wanted to make. You'll have a topic sentence, which identifies that point, an explanation, an example. This would come from the research, and then you'll talk about the significance. So I've provided a model for you, for which we're going to talk about here in a moment, from a Temple Grandin paper that I wrote. Now keep in mind that in this process of the paper, I'm still also drafting it along with you. So this is also my introduction and my first discussion section. Now it's not finished, right? I would probably need to revise it a little bit, but I'm really trying to model for you even my own writing processes to kind of take away some of the mystique of it all. And then to learn or read more about the writing assignments requirements, you can review the content page on writing the rhetorical listening essay. So just remember that as stated in the syllabus, you have to show evidence of the writing process, and submitting your rough drafts as assigned fulfills that requirement. Keep in mind that I may not grade your paper, your final draft, if you don't show evidence of the writing process. So let's look at my model. Now, this link here will take you to more information about writing an introduction. And you can read that or listen to that content page on your own. This discussion 1 also takes you to more information about writing a discussion section in general, and we'll follow up with that on a different video. But let's look at my model of this paper at this point in the writing process for me. So, what I need to have for this paper, an introduction and a discussion section. So below is a working draft of a rhetorical listening paper based on Temple Grandin's This I Believe essay. Notice that this rough draft borrows heavily from the discussion board posts from lesson 5 and 6. You can use those discussions to jumpstart your essay. You'll need to continue to elaborate, revise, and edit as you move through the paper cycle though, but this gives you an idea of how to get started when writing your essay. You'll also need to see, you'll also see the meta text in brackets in this rough draft. Meta text being my thought processes. Those are notes to myself and to you so that you can kind of see where I'm at. It's helpful to leave notes to yourself if you're struggling to finish a section, to know where you need to revise later or to know where to add more support. And in lesson 7, you'll see more development and some of these textual markers will be addressed. So when I'm writing a paper, it's really difficult sometimes for me when I'm writing a paper to get it all down. It doesn't flow sometimes, or I'll be writing on something and I'm like, oh, that's really good. I need to save that for later. And I'll make a note to myself. So what you're seeing here are these textual markers to myself, those kind of like thought processes. You're seeing my little bubbles above my head. So introduction. So I was struggling to get started with my introduction, to be real honest with you. So I just kind of put a note here to myself, paragraph with brief summary of Grandin's essay, Seeing in Beautiful, Precise Pictures, introducing it to unfamiliar readers. So I know that I need to go back and write that paragraph. All right, so I need a paragraph that's going to tell my reader kind of a summary of what Grandin is talking about. Okay, got that. So Grandin's thesis in her essay is that her autism allows her to see and experience the world differently. This difference has helped her develop more humane slaughterhouses that promote the ethical treatment of cattle. To understand Grandin's thesis, it is important for readers to understand that 1, people with autism have not always been treated with dignity, and 2, that it's important that we treat autistic individuals with dignity, respect, and compassion because when we do, all of our lives are enriched for it. So that's my thesis statement, right? So discussion 1, my first main point. Now, I'm not going to put discussion 1 in my paper, so I made a note to change that. In order to understand Grandin's essay and how her autism allowed her to see the world differently, it is important for readers to understand how mistreated and stigmatized people with autism have historically been in American society. In Inventing the Feeble Mind, James W. Trent Jr. describes how in the 19th century and earlier, people with mental impairments lived at home and were cared for during their entire lives by the families. But in the 20th century, state-run institutions became more common. The result is that people with cognitive impairments were institutionalized, abandoned, and left to suffer in overcrowded and underfunded group homes. This is also the case for Grandin, who states in her book, Thinking in Pictures, how her mother was encouraged to give up custody of Grandin to an institution because Grandin was difficult to manage and her outbursts were sometimes very aggressive. More from the book here, maybe a quote for support. So that's a note to myself to come back next week and work on that. Unfortunately, the cultural logic that autistic people were not smart, capable, and meaningful members of society was often reiterated in doctors' medical school textbooks and in parenting literature and in film. For example, many Americans learned about autism in the 1980s and 90s from the film Rain Man, and Raymond's character was removed from his family and living in an institution. Now, I made a note that I need to connect back to Grandin here. So while a pervasive cultural logic was that those with autism were burdens on their families and should be hidden from society, Grandin's experience, as illustrated in her essay and book, shows that we have historically treated autistic people very badly. So now I was kind of in a mood, I was feeling it, I kind of was like, oh, I know where I'm going with this. So I went on a little bit ahead. So for discussion 2, I kind of got started on it, just a little bit. Grandin's essay shows that previous cultural logics were wrong, and that rather than locking them away from society and institution, autistic people should be integrated into society. Grandin's essay promotes the dignity of people with autism and offers readers the opportunity to see how, while not every autistic person is capable of getting a PhD as Grandin did, autistic people should still have enriching and fulfilling experiences with families and friends. They should have job opportunities that are appropriate to their abilities because work means dignity, fulfillment, and community. For example, and then this is where I would probably need to finish this paragraph with an example from Grandin's life, and maybe then another paragraph, for example, of other autistic people who've lived happy and healthy lives. And then I would have my conclusion, which I still need to write. So if you'll notice here, I have my topic sentence, my explanation, my research for support, but I probably need a quote here. I probably need to integrate a quote from Grandin. The same thing here, topic sentence, explanation. I even tell you, for example, an example, connect to Grandin, and then significance. So this is not necessarily my finished rough draft. As you can see, it's still a work in progress. But what I hope that you see from this is that you can use this outline that you wrote or maybe you thought about and use that to kind of fill in these sections of this paper. Now, I didn't write a full introduction and discussion one yet. I was just kind of not really feeling it yet. And so, but instead, I did write I've got a good solid 4 paragraphs to get towards this paper. And so, as you're working on this paper, if you find that, your introduction isn't really coming along, but you really kind of know with the discussion 1 and 2 what you want to write about, you can go ahead and get started there. The point of this week's lesson is to give me an idea that you've started doing your research, you've started thinking about the cultural logics, you've started thinking about what it is you want to say in regard to this topic and then this I believe essay, and that you've gotten started writing it. The hardest part about writing is getting started writing, but there's no other way around it. You just have to put pen to paper. You just have to put your fingers on the keyboard. I used to play roller derby. I know it's hard to believe I'm such a dainty, delicate little flower when you look at me, but I played roller derby, and my derby name was Professor Sakabiach, and I wanted to be desperately good at roller derby. I really, really did. And I will tell you, I met a lot of people who would show up for practice, and they said the same exact things. They would say, I want to be good at roller derby. I want to be good. And then we would never see them again, right? Or they would show up to derby, they would lace up their skates, they would get hit a couple times, and then we'd never see them again. And you can talk about roller derby, you can watch roller derby bouts, you can watch footage, but I'm telling you, the only way you can get better at roller derby is by putting on your skates and lacing them up and getting hit a whole lot, as much as you don't like it. So oftentimes I tell students this example because it does feel like that a lot when we write. It feels like we want to be a good writer, but it is really painful to put on our skates and lace them up and get hit a lot. But the only way that you can be a better writer is to write and to revise and to write some more. And the only way you can be a better roller derby player is to lace up your skates, get on the track, and get hit, and then get hit some more. And then you'll walk away with some really awesome bruises that you can show off for bragging rights, which I did have a couple of those. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Again, like I said, this isn't necessarily meant to be a perfect rough draft. I don't even care if it's very good. I just want to see a really solid running start at the first half of the paper. All right. If you have any questions, let me know.